Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. There is a great article, and I mean one of the best boxing pieces I've read this year. And it's right now on Yahoo Sports from an excellent writer, Kevin Iole, spelled I-O-L-E, in which he asked the question, where does Floyd Mayweather Jr. rank against his peers of the last quarter century? Now, he has a cutoff, so Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard, who certainly would be among the elites, are not on the list. But if you fought 10 times in the 1988 to 2012 span, then Kevin Iole will consider your entire career. So he has people on the list like Thomas the Hitman Hearns, considering his entire career, Roberto Duran, and Mike Tyson, three fighters who arguably were in their prime in the 1980s, not any time in the last 10 years. Okay, now let's talk about this list, and let's talk about, I'll just name a series of the picks and just give a quick sketch because I'm really limited here to about 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, even I start to get bored. Okay? At number 25, he has Oscar De La Hoya. At number 24, he has Shane Mosley. At number 23, he has Felix Trinidad. Number 22, he has Riddick Bowe. Number 21, and I'm glad this guy made the list, he has Humberto Chiquita Gonzalez, a great fighter. And at number 20, he has Iron Mike Tyson. Now, let me just say, Oscar De La Hoya at number 25 is too low. Just close your eyes for a second and just imagine if one of today's elite fighters, one of the guys on the top 10 pound for pound list, was busted for steroids. Would you think less of him? What if the guy wasn't busted but actually admitted to using the cream and the clear and to having gotten those substances from the same outlet that apparently supplied numerous baseball players, including Barry Bonds, allegedly, right? Would you think any less of that fighter? Well, my point to you is simply this. Oscar De La Hoya fought Shane Mosley in the rematch. Let me make a couple of points. First, I saw that fight. Whenever I do rankings, I do them on what actually happened, not what the judges scored. I thought Oscar De La Hoya beat Shane Mosley in that rematch. I know the judges disagree with me. All I could say to YouTube Nation is watch that fight. I thought De La Hoya won that fight. But more importantly, Shane Mosley admitted that he apparently was on the cream and the clear that he received from Balco during that fight. So I believe we really need to look at that fight and re-examine it. To the crowd that wants to re-examine Margarito Cotto won, all I can say is, here you have a guy who admitted using the cream and the clear. I think Oscar, his opponent, we really need to view that fight as a win for Oscar, right? Oscar shouldn't be below Shane Mosley, in my opinion, on this list. Let me also point out that, while it's true that Oscar got at least a couple of gifts, right? I believe members of Oscar's own family are probably wondering how he got the decision against Pernell Whitaker. And, of course, the Felix Sturm fight, let's just say that was curious. I thought Sturm won that fight. But that said, didn't Oscar really put on a clinic against Felix Trinidad for the first 9 rounds of that fight? I thought Trinidad won the fight, but did Trinidad beat Oscar, or did Oscar beat himself by running away those last few rounds? Now, I know it's a loss, right? Oscar has himself to blame. But all I could say is if we're ranking fighters, what's Trinidad doing ahead of Oscar De La Hoya? Oscar to me was the more talented fighter that night, right? He beat himself, so it was. I know people are going to disagree with me, but realistically, I thought Oscar, when he stood and fight and wanted to fight, I thought he showed in the ring that he was a better fighter than Felix Trinidad, right? Let me also say, Mosley should be a little bit lower to me. Trinidad should be a little bit lower. Riddick Bowe. I still maintain, and maybe I'm biased, I was raised in Queens. Riddick Bowe was raised in Brooklyn. Maybe I'm partial to Brooklyn fighters, because I also feel this about Mike Tyson. Riddick Bowe should be much higher than number 22 on this list. If you want to see great heavyweight action, a level that I don't think Lennox Lewis ever touched, and I know Lewis beat Bowe in the amateurs, but if you want to see a level of talent that not even Lennox Lewis touched, look at Riddick Bowe against Jorge Gonzalez. You're going to see a big man throwing fluid combinations, and the combinations are unpredictable and include uppercuts, right? I thought Riddick Bowe, talent-wise, was spectacular. His biggest problem, other than, in my opinion, and I know it was a toss-up fight, other than getting robbed in the Evander Holyfield rematch. That's a close fight, let's face it. Take a look at that Fan Man fight and ask yourself, didn't Fan Man actually help Holyfield rest for the second half of that fight? I thought that fight was razor close. Obviously, Bowe had a problem too with Andrew Golota. That hurts him in the ranking, but it's clear that Golota was fouling Bowe throughout that fight. In fact, Golota got disqualified twice. If you look at Bowe's record, believe it or not, it's 43-1 with 33 knockouts. I would say talent-wise, really, I thought he was more talented than Lennox Lewis. I'll agree, he didn't have the career Lennox Lewis had. But talent-wise, I have a problem with Bowe this low. Mike Tyson. If you were alive in the 1980s, you remember what a dominant heavyweight champion was. And when I say dominant, I'm not talking about, falling asleep while watching the Klitschko's, right? I'm not talking about watching Vladimir Klitschko in a jab fest with Sultan Ibragimov. I'm talking about Tyson fights going one of two ways, right? Marvis Frazier, blown out early. Trevor Burbank, blown out early. Larry Holmes looking good for a couple of rounds. Then when Larry got hit, it was over, right? There's that Mike Tyson. Mike Spinks. You remember that? Spinks was unbeaten going into the fight. That fight did not go past the first round, right? Then, of course, you had the Mike Tyson fights where Bone Crusher Smith turned into Bone Hugger Smith, right? Guys were literally holding on to Mike Tyson for dear life. You knew he was the dominant fighter because he would be in the ring and the other guy would be hugging him, afraid from early to even fight him. Now, I know the criticism is, who did Mike Tyson fight? All I can say is, wow. If I said to you, dominant heavyweight champion, those were dominant heavyweight champion. Isn't Mike Tyson's name among the first you would mention? If I said to you, best punchers pound for pound, isn't Mike Tyson on the list? I understand that Tyson faded late. I understand that Lennox Lewis beat him. Let's face it, that was a shell of Mike Tyson, right? The Mike Tyson who lost to Evander Holyfield, that's a shell of Mike Tyson. The Tyson really we should focus on is Tyson 88, 87, right? When he's fighting guys like Tony Tucker and, Trevor Burbank, even a little bit earlier than that. That Mike Tyson, I think, belongs in the top 7, not down here at number 20. Let's talk about some more fighters. Number 19, Mike McCallum. I told you it's a great list. Number 18, James Toney. Number 17, Juan Manuel Marquez. Number 16, and I like this, Michael Carbajal, excellent fighter. Number 15, Marco Antonio Barrera. Number 14, Joe Calzaghe. Number 13, Lennox Lewis. Number 12, Manny Pacquiao. It's a hard list. Number 11, Bernard Hopkins. Okay, now let's just quickly talk about this. You know, there's a difference, in my opinion, between talent. And talent is just what you're given, right? Some guys are just born with the ability to throw a baseball 90 miles an hour, right? Some guys just wake up in the morning, haven't studied anything, haven't looked at a single film, but yet they have punching power with both hands, right? Other guys, you just know they've always been fast-handed. I doubt there was a time in Ray Leonard's life where he didn't have hand speed, right? Maybe they can augment what they're given, but talent's really what you're given. Skill, I believe, is something totally different. I believe skill is what you learn, right? Skill actually requires an understanding, right? The talented guy can throw 100 miles an hour. The skill guy, the Greg Maddux, can throw a changeup on a 3-2 pitch and paint the corner. Right? He can throw a curveball on a 3-2 pitch on the inside corner and have that be called for a strike. Right? The skill guy actually learns the game. He learns techniques. He's a technician. Now, one of the problems I have with this list is that I believe skill is downplayed. The best counterpuncher I've ever seen, in my opinion, in my life. I thought this guy was just top of the food chain when it came to counterpunching, and he was not a great athlete, was James Toney, right? If you want to see a masterpiece, take a look at James Toney against Evander Holyfield. Now, Holyfield's rated higher than him on this list. He shouldn't be. James Toney's the better fighter. Right, James Toney, in my opinion, belongs really in the top 4 on this list. Toney, I know he lost to Roy Jones. I know Toney, quite frankly, lost some fights before he even entered the ring, because he was that athlete who was out there trying to lose 10, 20, 30, 40 pounds before the fight, right? I'm not saying Toney was a great athlete. He's a great fighter. Right? And he could counter you to death. He could duck under your punches. Very shrewd fighter. As I said before, I've seen few guys completely dissect Evander Holyfield. Let me just point out that after that fight, something that's little known, James Toney announced that he was willing to give Holyfield a rematch. Toney wanted to fight Holyfield. He was prepared to fight Holyfield in a rematch on Holyfield's terms. Did you know Holyfield did not accept the offer? By the way, that Toney Holyfield fight ended when Holyfield's corner threw in the towel. Think about that. A great fighter in his corner threw in the towel. I think James Toney is much more elite than this. Quite frankly, I'd have James Toney over fighters like Juan Manuel Marquez, who I consider to be ranked too low here as well. Right? I would put both of these guys ahead of Michael Carbajal, who I like and who deserves to be on the list. Right? I would put both of those fighters ahead of Marco Antonio Barrera. Right? And, let me also say this about Joe Calzaghe. He's a top 10 fighter. People don't realize that in title fights, as noted by the author here, Calzaghe was 22-0. Now, I know people are going to say, hey, look, wasn't Joe protected, yada, yada. If you want to see 2 classic fights, 2 dissections of opponents, take a look at Joe Calzaghe against Mikkel Kessler. Kessler was unbeaten at the time. Take a look at Joe Calzaghe against Jeff Lacey. Lacey was unbeaten at the time. Also, if we're going to look at Bernard Hopkins now and say Bernard Hopkins still has it, my God, he's world class. Just remember that Joe Calzaghe came to America and became the first left-handed fighter to beat Bernard Hopkins. Right? That's the same Hopkins who is still an elite fighter. So if you're going to tell me Joe Calzaghe hasn't fought anyone, I say look at those 3 fights. I'm not even going to count the Roy Jones fight. Okay? Let me just say this too. Bernard Hopkins, to me, is like James Toney. These are guys who are skilled, right? I wouldn't call Hopkins a great athlete, right? But he's skilled on a very elite level. Bernard Hopkins should not be, in my opinion, outside of the top 7. Nor should some of the other names I'm going to mention. I'll name the top 10 going back, 10-1. Ricardo Lopez, number 10, elite fighter. Floyd Mayweather, number 9. You got to be kidding me. Should be much higher. Thomas Hearns, number 8. I was a Hitman fan in the 1980s. You know, I was actually rooting for Hearns against Leonard. Thomas Hearns does not deserve to be number 8. He certainly doesn't deserve, on his best day, to be placed ahead of Floyd Mayweather Jr. Number 7, Julio Cesar Chavez Sr. Number 6, George Foreman. Now, let me say this about Foreman. If I'm going to put Foreman this high, how do I explain? Forget the Ali fight. How do I explain the Jimmy Young fight? How do I explain the Ron Lyle fight? Now, look, I know Foreman won that Ron Lyle fight. Oh, come on. That fight was a straight-up shootout. Foreman was on the canvas. We're talking about prime Foreman. Now, Foreman comes back. Who does he beat for the belt? No, not Mike Tyson. Lennox Lewis. No, not Lennox Lewis. Riddick Bowe. No, not Riddick Bowe. He beats Michael Moore. Then he's fighting Axel Schultz. He's fighting Shannon Briggs. All I can say is, wow, you're kidding me. I love George Foreman. He's one of the best fighters I've ever seen. But if we're going to criticize Mike Tyson for the quality of his opposition, shouldn't we question some of Foreman's biggest fights? Let me also say this too. You saw Amir Khan get penalized for excessive pushing against Lamont Peterson. What Amir Khan does in that fight pales in comparison to what George Foreman got away with in the Frazier fight, the first one. What I want you to do is to go back and look at that first one, then ask yourself, could Foreman have beaten Frazier without the pushing? I think it's an open question. Number 5, they have Evander Holyfield. How is Evander number 5 when a guy who beat him twice, Riddick Bowe, is somewhere in the 20s? I think Evander's a little bit too high here, right? Number 4, Pernell Whitaker, best defensive fighter I have ever seen. Number 3, and I like this, he's the highest rated heavyweight. Larry Holmes. If you remember the days, you haven't seen a better jab than this. Larry Holmes, excellent fighter. Number 2, Roberto Duran. Now, let me just say this. If Roberto Duran lost to Kirkland Lang, right, this is before he fights Davey Moore in the 1980s. If he lost to Kirkland Lang and then would later lose to guys like Pat Lawler, how is he placed ahead of unbeaten Floyd Mayweather? I just don't see it. Again, Roberto Duran, highly skilled, certainly belongs on the list. Does he belong on the list ahead of Floyd Mayweather? I don't think so. Let me also say, Manny Pacquiao, right? When you look back at the Pacquiao career, don't be overwhelmed by just what he's done lately. Understand, this guy had a great series of fights with Eric Morales, right? This guy has had a great series of fights with the best at the lighter weights, right? Didn't he also have a great series against Marco Antonio Barrera? I mean, Manny Pacquiao, this is just, Pacquiao really was a Hall of Famer before he became a welterweight, right? And so when you look at Manny Pacquiao and the dominance through the weight classes. For Pacquiao not to be in the top 10, that's a head scratcher for me, right? Pacquiao is talented. I would argue Pacquiao is more talented than he is skilled. But Pacquiao shouldn't be down around number 12. Now, I'll leave it to the cognoscenti to argue over whether Pacquiao belongs ahead of Floyd. On my list, Floyd would be either number 1 or number 2. Right? The other fighter, depending on the day of the week, who would be number 1 or number 2 isn't Manny Pacquiao. It's the fighter who Kevin Iole has as number 1. And this guy, quite frankly, was one of the best talents we've ever seen. But I don't believe he was one of the best skilled fighters we've seen. And that's Roy Jones Jr. Roy Jones owned the 1990s. We didn't even know what would happen if Roy Jones ever got hit. That didn't happen until he fought Antonio Tarver. Right? Roy Jones literally took on unbeaten James Toney. Took on Bernard Hopkins, who hadn't lost for several years. Took on Mike McCallum. Took on Virgil Hill. These were big names at the time. Hill, a little bit past his prime. I'll concede that. Mike McCallum, a little bit past his prime. But all I'm saying is the level of dominance that Roy Jones displayed during that decade exceeds the level being displayed right now by Manny Pacquiao, who may have beaten Marquez the last fight, may not have. In my book, by the way, Manny Pacquiao has never beaten Juan Manuel Marquez, right? And Floyd Mayweather, who, let's face it, he had to come from behind against Ab Judah, got his bell rung by Shane Mosley. That Castillo fight, there's still a group out there that believes in their heart that Castillo won that first fight, right? With Roy Jones, there was no doubt. One of my favorite rounds of boxing is the last round of the Roy Jones-Vinny Paz fight. Vinny Paz was a pretty good fighter. You would never have guessed it from that last round. Roy Jones, by the way, according to CompuBox, once went through a round where he literally landed dozens of punches and, according to CompuBox, did not get hit. Right? Think about that. Right? So, the ambivalence I have with Roy Jones is simply Jones is that pitcher who could come in and throw 105 miles an hour. Right? He is Rob Dibble in baseball in his prime. Right? Floyd Mayweather, on the other hand, has the physical gifts. I know he calls himself God-gifted. I think he's selling himself short. Because Mayweather marries those gifts with skills. Right? In other words, where Jones comes up short, Floyd Mayweather takes it to the next level. Right? So, I'll concede Mayweather hasn't dominated like Jones did, right? That Ricky Hatton fight was rough and tumble for a few rounds, right? While Mayweather hasn't dominated like Jones did in the 90s, I would say that Mayweather is the much more complete fighter than Roy Jones. All you have to do is look at Jones now. We're seeing Jones caught up against the ropes against fighters like Jeff Lacy, Danny Green, right? Dennis Lebedev, right? Jones, when Jones is up on the ropes, he looks like he's being overpowered. Joe Calzaghe, right? When Floyd Mayweather is up on the ropes, Mayweather actually looks like he's dictating the action, right? So, today I'd probably vote Mayweather the best fighter. I'm going to disagree with Kevin Iole of the last quarter century. Catch me on another day after I've watched that last round of that Vinny Paz fight, or after I look at Roy Jones in the 1988 Olympics, and I might change my mind. But I think Jones and Floyd Mayweather really are the best of the last quarter century. Let me hear what you think. Let's have the discussion here online so everyone can see it. And of course, visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for watching.